and she touches on some of the hardest topics in the nation's history: gentrification, displacement, and affordable housing.
It's become an affordable place to be. So developers are liking it. But for individuals, you're 20 minutes, 19 miles from downtown to Raleigh. There are businesses that will be priced out. Unfortunately, some of them are legacy businesses establishing all of the preservation programs that will benefit for decades.
Yeah. Okay, the Gentry Podcast. I know that you will be loving it. We here to break it down so that you start to understand your local government. Who are the leaders? Time to get active, do something about it. Dealing with jobs, the workforce, and affordable housing. Motivate and inspire. Elevate, take it higher. For the next generation. Knowledge is power for your community. Giving you the info that you really need. Time to make a change and a difference. Tune in, don't miss it. It's the Gentry. The Gentry Podcast. The Gentry Podcast. Making a change, switching it up.
Hello, and welcome to the Jentry Podcast. Today, I am your host, Jonathan Mason, but more importantly, we have Shannon Johnson with us. She is the Community and Economic Development Director of Zebulon, North Carolina, but she's more than that. She is a writer, and she touches on some of the hardest topics in the nation's history: gentrification, displacement, and affordable housing. So I'm really excited. Shannon, thank you for being here today. How are you doing?
I'm great. That's an incredible introduction. So I hope I can hold up to it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I have to dive into it. So what is the special sauce of Zebulon? What makes it the best place to live in the United States?
Well, I think right now, the interesting thing is that Zebulon and eastern Wake County had a different feel from the rest of Wake County. We saw a lot of development happen to the west of Raleigh, to the north, in the last 10 years or so. And now we're seeing the South Raleigh become, a hot area, even into Johnston County. And then the eastern part has always had a more rural feel. It's resonated more with the counties that are to the east, Nash and Franklin. And so even though it's within Wake County, it's been a little different. But recently, as things are expanding, it's become an affordable place to be. So developers are liking it. But for individuals, you're 20 minutes, 19 miles from downtown to Raleigh, and it's a small town. The charm is here, the knowing everybody, the smiles, the friendly waves, the politeness, everything you expect in Southern charm is here. It's a very diverse community. This community, back in its origins, really was created through, as most are, a railroad stop and some merchant dealings at that stop. And so while there were, maybe entrepreneurs and probably financially stable, maybe well-off white folks who established the town, created the merchant area, created the general stores, and started building some houses and doing all those cool things. This area, this town, before some of it that's now part of the town, but obviously wasn't incorporated then, was a very large freeman town. Really, it has been, for a large part of its existence, 50-50 African-American, white. And then obviously, as our country has developed into many, many more ethnicities and folks that want to, establish themselves here, it's obviously changed a bit. But that's always been an interesting part of this southern town. As we see so many years ago, 2 elections ago, actually a few more than that, we saw our first African-American woman on council, and then it's changed over time, and now our commissioners are mostly women. I think it's like probably more, there's all African-American commissioners and one Caucasian, and then we have election coming up and we have an extra spot that one of our longtime commissioners retired, so we have that spot. And so it's just an interesting place to be. There's so many different pieces that you don't know until you're here. When you talk to folks, when you sit down in one of our establishments and just kind of get the run of it. You'll get new people that have moved here. Our population has grown, which means all of our amenities are on the rise and all our commercial business is starting to fill out. So you get the newer folks' perspective. You can get people that have been here a long time and love what they see, people that have been here a long time and want it to go back to what it was when they were 25, 30 years old. There's so many different perspectives, but the history, I think, is incredibly unique. And you need to know the history of a small space to understand what is treasured and what is needed, what is wanted, and why. And so that's part of economic development when you get out of the databases, computer screens, reports, traditional methods, school of government, which is great foundational learning. Beyond all that, it's knowing your space and knowing the people there and knowing what your plan is and how it affects them. And so I have made it a priority to get as much public input as possible when making any plans, because I don't know I know on paper what a place needs, but I don't know in a specific place what their wants and needs are. So it was really enlightening to do that for the strategic plan here. And so we're enacting what our folks said they want to see.
Shannon, I love this. And when we spoke before, I knew that we were akin in how we viewed things. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. I will come back to your background, but everything that you're saying is public input, working with the community. What is a community and economic development director, and why? I'll take it a step further. Why are those two titles together?
Well, I want to clear up one thing about the title, okay? It's confusing. So I am community and economic development because of what the word community is, community and economic development. I will tell you, if you're out there perusing the job boards or looking at titles in different towns, most of the title community and economic development is planning. And so there needs to be a little bit of there needs to be an insertion of a different word for the planning directors that are also doing economic development. God bless them, because that's a lot on your plate. But if you are directing, many departments doing that, it's not the same, because planning is needed. Planning is an amazing partner to anything I'm trying to get accomplished. But I'm viewing it and holding it as we recognize the community, we recognize the needs currently, and most importantly, and I feel like it's the part that doesn't get spoken out loud in a lot of rooms, I'm going to recognize the impact that traditional economic development is going to have on community. These have been in silos for a long time. I'm over here doing economic development in XYZ city, and someone's over here in housing authority in XYZ city, and then there's planning in the middle. And so that's how it's evolved. But we've seen over years in some places that looking at the intersectionality of many of the outcomes of these departments really is where your success comes from. And it's not really some revolutionary idea. I mean, it's been in private industry for a very long time that folks figured out a lot of cross-sector impact. But I found a plan back in 2010. I found a plan online from Burlington, Vermont, and it was very well funded. I'm going to say that out loud because I don't want anybody to think they can just come up with this. They had a lot of headquarters and big insurance companies and different things around there that do have, line items for these really impactful strategies to be formed. They did a good job of getting sponsors and funding. And then they also pulled in these folks along with the public input to decide how to craft a plan for moving forward that included health, economic development, housing, a lot of different components that you would be looking at as leadership of a city. And when they did that and they worked through the better part of a year to establish it, and they really did meet and work. I read all of the notes, so it wasn't just one of those, it took a year, but you only met once a month, that kind of thing. There was a lot of work that was done. And what blew me away, because I hadn't been able to articulate it with any kind of data behind it, is that you have to look at all of the areas of we could say a society, or the microcosm being a town or city, before you cry success, right? Before you wave your flag and get your blue ribbon. I've always known that, but it's difficult to find anywhere to see in an economic development realm. How do we quantify that, and how do we make sure that others will believe us? Because there's got to be some data, some published work that says this will go. So this was that work for me, because one of the things that they crossed was your economic success can be here, meaning that we've added X number of jobs that was on our goal. We've added this much tax dollars to the revenue for our, industrial, commercial, utility usage, all the things that we can count, we can quantify to say we have hit a goal. And you could do that, and most at the time, most economic development offices did. They hit those numbers and they celebrated, but they crossed it with your infant mortality rate. So that is such a disparate figure. But if you are not doing well with the basics of bringing life into the world in your healthcare system, then how can you possibly be successful here? And they tied all the links back, and it went for education and other areas that you would evaluate if you were looking at the success of a place. So they cross-referenced a lot of different things. Then they evaluated themselves every 5 years, and it was a 20-year plan. And then it was reworked into having a different flavor on the next iteration. But the point was, really smart people with a good amount of money, with very serious, how much money was in the room at the time they were doing those things. So they were taking their time away from very important places they needed to be. And so when people do that, I feel like they want to have some benefit out of the end of that. They're not going to do that for their volunteer hours. So I really was able to lean on that. And I got to know some of the folks that were involved. They were, still around doing the good work. So I had a few references to be able to call on here and there. And I will say that that helped me explain to people, mostly elected officials in small towns when I would come in to work with them, or leadership management, the inclusiveness, especially in a small space where every win and every loss is amplified. It's like under 100 times, magnifying glass. And so we could be incredibly successful in downtown, be incredibly successful in industrial development in this small space we're in, 7, 8, 9 miles of town, depending on which one. And then we could see gentrification to a neighborhood adjacent to one of those areas happen in one development, happen in one investor, happen in 3 or 4 months of even if it's not on the major scale, it's on a minor scale where we want to live adjacent to downtown now. So we're going to buy this little house and put a 3-story townhouse there. And then the neighbor and the neighbor and the neighbor. And it only takes a little while before all 4, 5, 6, 7 of those streets are now a different neighborhood, and obviously displacement. So what good is it to build your space if you can't make it good for the people who have already been there for 3 generations, 2 generations? So that's the idea of community. Very long-winded answer, but I wanted to give a complete picture of why it's attached to economic development.
For sure. And the one thing that comes to my mind is how lucky the town is to have somebody in leading economic development and even community development that is truly thinking about the community. Because as I've heard in other cases, it can be separate. It can feel very separate. By tying those 2 titles together and truly looking through that lens, you're able to keep that focus. And like you said, what's the use of making the best community if everybody that made it the best community over the last 3 decades somewhere it's in a different community? What's the point? So I love that you're thinking through that and being very strategic. And if you're at the helm and bringing the business and bringing changing different neighborhoods, but you're getting that public input and you're thinking about the community, that's when growth can actually be sustainable and benefit multiple all the parties involved. So I love that. But so we've gotten to a lot, but I have to get into your background, Shannon. You have an incredible background. Now, I have to ask, as I ask everyone, during childhood, did you know you wanted to get into a life of public service? And then how did you've been in federal, you've been in other towns. Like, what is this trajectory then?
Yeah, it's definitely not a normal trajectory um, for this industry, I guess, because I really have two separate careers. So when I grew up, I didn't know what I want. I don't think I kind of am a little closer to knowing what I want to do, but I definitely had no idea. So I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, like the metro area, and actually in Annapolis, Maryland. And so there was a lot of Department of Defense employment during Cold War, telling my age. So that was an easy way to enter kind of grown up work. So I worked for the Department of Navy. I worked for defense contractors. I did what I could do where they would allow me to. And the whole goal was just to get a job in the next building over making, this much more. So you just hopped around a little bit, but it was commuting job, so I started my life that way. Now, over time, I did a lot of things in between, moved around the country a little bit. But when I came back to the area and I started to work in that field again, it was right after 9/11. So Department of Homeland Security was created, which to me was like a no-brainer because we knew for decades before. When I talk about silos, I lived through the worst of silos and difficulty communicating the same information to each other. Homeland Security seemed like a great thing, and I was lucky enough to work with the first Homeland Security incubator
Wow.
in Maryland, and so we were pulling in small businesses of many. So you think about Homeland Security as all these different agencies combined. So now you have, you don't just have if you were in defense, you usually ran in, a certain part of it, and you worked with companies or to match them to contracts where you just work for the company on a certain contract or something like that. So this was like a whole bunch of things. So technology could be utilized in so many different ways under that umbrella. So it's really an exciting time. So one of the companies that was in this incubator developed like a vaccine for anthrax, which was it was a terrorist thing that was going through the mail at the time. And, it wasn't the first time anybody had ever dealt with it, but it kind of seemed to be kind of a hot topic showing up in places and hurting people. That was one extreme. And then there were also, just a lot of other kinds of technology that was what the focus was, technology to satisfy the needs of that big umbrella department. So it was really a cool place to work because you got to feel all these different companies at beginning stages, all the way through, a company that's already doing good work, but now has come on board and created this, this really cool vaccine that's going to, save people's lives. So there's a lot of interesting things going on. And, and I was able to work with, different organizations that work. So it was a brand new time in government. That never happens in federal government. So it was really exciting. But I will say that doing that, I worked for some companies, I consulted, I did a lot of different things. And what I found is I ended up in a place where I had, the right letters behind my name in some company and, and I was doing this and that and it was all good. But, I had a bunch of kids and trying to live a life. Once I got to that point where you're supposed to be kind of, balancing things out because you have enough people working for you, you have enough going on that you can, your job now is to be a leader and your job is to make sure everything happens the way it's supposed to. I couldn't get satisfaction out of that. I really couldn't. And so I became further and further this person at work and this person at home in my real life. And I thought, this is not. So I ran into one of the Main Street organizations that was trying to do something in a town. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know these places existed. I just thought, merchant associations is all I had ever known. And so I started following a little more and volunteering, and I can get pretty passionate about things. So I got involved in one of their causes, got pretty passionate about it. And then I realized, like, this building of a space properly, being involved in that is something that I could put my time into, feel good about, and also be able to show my children why I wasn't at home or here, there, or the other, right? So I started looking, and I had to look in the South because everything in the Northeast has been developed, overdeveloped, and redeveloped. There is nothing new. There's nowhere to do it. So most of these activities were happening. And we looked around for a couple of years, and we chose North Carolina. And we visited all these different spaces in North Carolina, and we landed outside of Charlotte at first. So I've worked in several towns around the state, and I feel like the economic development piece for me, it comes from a different maybe place than some other folks get involved. I'm not really sure what the trajectory is. I know that there's people that come from the Main Street program that go into it. There's people that come from planning that go into it. There's people that work for chambers and just funnel into doing it. So there isn't one way. But for me, my bachelor's degree is sociology and history. And so I felt like those two intersections probably is what gave me the most satisfaction of doing this kind of work. And so I didn't think that at the time. I had no clue. But later, looking back, I can see that I get a lot of satisfaction out of honoring the history of a space while we move forward. And then the sociology piece being, really engaging with the public in a way that is not a directive. It's very much wide open. I mean, economic development and what you do with it is very subjective. It's very subjective. And based on leadership or your elected officials, very, intention, it can be narrowed down, and then you're working in that realm. But overall, it's not like planning. It's not like your finance office in government. It's malleable. And as much as I need more structure in my life all the time, I appreciate being able to think about things in a way that isn't very rigid, because we find a lot more solutions for issues that way.
And then also, I think you can then bring your expertise, your different lens. And I feel like that's what it sounds like you've done, like by even taking a study that you saw in Burlington and seeing how that can inform what you're doing down here. Now, as far as the honoring the history of the community, it sounds like you guys have recently done a strategic plan. How was that process, and what were some of the priorities that came out of that?
Well, thank you for that question. I try to push that strategic plan in where I can. So I wrote an RFP. I was given by the town, by the elected officials who have an interest in preservation while growing. I mean, that's a strong piece for some of the people who have been here generation, really, their families go back to the beginning of part of this town. So their interest, and in hiring someone to come on and create an economic development program was definitely to include preservation of space while we're growing. So I was able to write an RFQ that not only looked at traditional, tell us our assets, our strengths, our challenges, what should we be looking into for industry? What should we be doing? Those types of things that are very easily you can put all of the properties here, all the parcels, in an array of size. And so you immediately know what's going to be easily done and what's going to be could be possibly 5, 10, 15-year assemblage of lots of properties you can get your hands on options for them to make, the big. So you can tell. But there are parts that do not come out in numbers and on paper. And that is the history and what people are interested in, and also what they care about. I know when you ask them what they care about, housing, preserving housing, am I going to be able to afford to live here with all these communities coming in, tax values going up, like the values going up, the tax rates going up, like so much is going to happen. It's inevitably going to happen. And so when a small place starts to grow, I'm going to divert here for just a second on taxes. When a small place starts to grow at a rate that we have, which is basically doubled in 5 years in residents, so services are needed. Some are mandated by the federal government, your fire and all the safety. If you can't do it yourself, you have to be contracting out another group to handle some things. So, another rural area, county or something like that. But there are ways to solve the problem, but eventually you want to be holding your own, right? So there's just down to who's answering the telephone and taking payments for things, like who's handling all of the plans that come in. Your planning office has to grow. I mean, these are salaries that need to be paid, that need to be market rate. You don't want to have a high attrition rate and be training people all the time. You're still like getting the work done. So what we find is that our tax rate might have to go up. And that is important to be able to supply the services that are needed. When all these homes are built and all these people move in, that money doesn't show up in the coffers immediately. Like, it's going to take some time to start flowing through. And we know generally what's coming every year. So what typically happens, and you look at the history of even some towns in Wake County, you can look at Apex and some other places, you can see the rise and fall. So there is a point where you're like, man, the tax rate here is like a little bit out of control. It typically, as elected officials, realize what's on the landscape, and their budget office and their manager and everyone's looking at the numbers and saying next year, you can start to go, the rate can go down because the money coming in is still there, right? But we're on a little bit of that cliff right now where we're kind of, so that happened. All of it happens in a predictable way. But what doesn't get addressed traditionally until after the fact is what happens to your housing that isn't brand new. What happens to your neighborhoods that are adjacent or sandwiched between brand new things and maybe a different product altogether, right? Or maybe you need different product because now you want to have a little more of that, maybe not completely urban, but urban style. I want to be able to walk downtown. I want to be able to walk over here and hit the park and the grocery. So there's a lot that goes into managing all of that from the town side. But if you want to look at it by numbers, not to cost as much, you want to look at it by, preserving your community, creating less tension, you really need to look at how to mitigate the displacement of gentrification. It will happen. Gentrification is going to happen, even if it only happened on infill lots, right? Where there's nothing there. Sure, it's going to happen. That's just part of what happens when all the other improvements are made, or all of the really interesting investment goes in a downtown, or as we are looking at our stadium area now is gaining a new tenant, and they have interest in developing some of the acreage, because there's a lot of acreage there, into a hotel or apartment or retail, restaurant, mixed use. I don't know, whatever their development is, whatever their plans tend to be a couple years down the road. But that area now, there's a big neighborhood out there that was built adjacent to the ballpark years ago, and it's the last phases are hitting. There's going to be more and more of that. So there are just, if you want the things you want and you want to curate what your space is, there's going to be investment. It's going to increase the value. So what we did in our RFQ was look at what are the issues we're going to face. We asked for a company, a consultancy to give us, what are the issues we're going to face and what are the ways to mitigate the displacement? What can we do? And so it took a lot of public input to get what do people want and need. I can do things on paper all day long, but would it tell me that, we need more diverse healthcare options here? Might not, that might not come up. So that came up. Housing was a big deal. Affordability. How am I going to have a job here? Am I going to have to commute? All the things that you would think. And so we were able to put into our strategy, we are addressing what we need for industrial. We are addressing what we need for entrepreneurship and small business support. We're also addressing readiness and being the inclusivity that we need to keep the balance of our community in several different ways. Like inclusivity can be types of businesses we have, types of ownership we have. All of that can be preserving the legacy of a neighborhood. So that can fall into it. Readiness is infrastructure that we need. Pipes haven't been redone since 1906 or whenever they did them. I'm sure there's some parts that have been here and there. Downtown is not an area that's been hit with all of that revitalization yet. So there's a lot, but we wanted it to be for people to be able to see and read and understand, even in a summary, that these things go together. So a little hint towards that kind of Burlington, not quite as severe because we're a smaller space, but that these things go together. So success in inclusivity can be lots of different things. Success in readiness can look different. So that's what we are currently working on. And that strategy, we've been working on this through the work of the strategy for 1 year, and it's good. And so the second year and the third year of the strategy will have the most visual and community felt impact, as probably any strategy would in a, whether it be housing or whatever you're trying to do. It's usually going to take a few years to show. So that's where we are.
It's very impressive. And I love the candor that you led with, that gentrification in some aspects of it is going to happen. And that's based on the investment, the tax rate, even though that should ebb and flow back down at some point, but it's going to happen. But it takes people that are intentional to understand how it connects to other aspects. So the housing, the inclusivity, the thought process of maybe preserving a neighborhood. I think that's impressive. In a perfect world, it doesn't happen. But do we live in a perfect world? No. But we get the buy-in from the community to, hey, this is what can happen. This is what we're doing to make sure that these things are connected so it doesn't happen. And here's the plan. So you see us as we work together to get there. I think that's very impressive. And one of the things you brought up was entrepreneurship and retention of business. And, oftentimes in economic, I don't say oftentimes, but in times, economic development means bringing in new industry, bringing in new industry, bringing in new industry. What are you guys doing to your businesses and also grow your local entrepreneurial talent?
Yeah, well, I'll start with entrepreneurship because that's probably the most recent and tangible development that we've had. So the launch program is an entrepreneurship program that is sponsored and coordinated by Wake Tech. And we are so lucky to be in Wake County because Wake Tech is the largest college in all of the land, the North Carolina land. But it is because of the ability that they have to be able to help us. And there are other community colleges that do this in other spaces in North Carolina. So not exclusive, but Zebulon was the last municipality in the county that didn't have a launch program. And so I certainly needed to get this strategy completed because working without a strategy is just work that it's a one-off. Not building anything really. You can maybe if you get lucky, but we needed that first year to figure out how it was going to be done, and just a little bit of logistics, and then understand really what other places went through when they started. So partnered with the chamber here, and so it's the chamber and the town and Wake Tech, and so we plan to execute our first cohort of either business owners or wannabe business owners, because it's really about wanting the application and the questions that are asked to, gain entry to the program are about really knowing what your goal is and knowing your audience and your market, all those things. So it can be an existing business, but we looked at all of that. We planned it all out, and then we were able to coincide it with the opening of the new campus, Wake Tech East, which is right over the Zebulon line in Wendell, and very easy to get to from here. And also we can pull maybe some folks that are just maybe aren't in that, or in the I'm one of the downtown Zebulon folks, or I'm usually over here hanging out, or I work at one of the places over here and I can't drive that far. People that typically might not hit it if we were having it at town hall or the chamber or the library or somewhere. So Also, school setting. I just think a school setting sets the tone for what you're doing in there, no doubt. And we were able to do the first cohort last fall, and it was a great success. And then this fall, we have our second cohort, which is full. I think there might have been one or two spots after some folks kind of maybe, couldn't make the work for them. But it's 10 weeks. We have an incredible instructor, and that's half the battle, at least, if not more. And so she's challenging, engaging, and she's able to really pull out of folks, what their inhibitions are, or face their obstacles in a way that's productive and not frightening. And then by the end, we do have a pretty fabulous graduation, by the way. And so we have a graduation, and they have pitch time, and sometimes they have a product, sometimes they need investment. It's been a success all around the country by groups that have picked it up, but it's a really big success in Lake County. So it is a way to infuse entrepreneurship that's hopefully sustainable into your community. And so really happy about that. Now, as far as business sustain, what I can say is we work really hard to find a next spot. If somebody needs to leave their spot for growth, if somebody needs to leave their spot for other reasons, we're looking. My colleague is a downtown coordinator, and she's really in touch with folks because she's been in the area forever. This is her after retirement contract job. She knows everyone. And so she's able to, really search it out based on beyond what you can find on a search online or just in general for real estate. Which is helpful for me because I'm not from here forever. So I've been able to learn a lot through that. But that's kind of what I would say, we we can and will provide service to almost any extent that our businesses need. However, the next step in that specific area is, our first small business retention and expansion survey. And while it sounds like just go give a survey, pump out a survey, surveys are tricky. And in doing research and going through academia, there's guardrails around surveys that make it effective. So including that and all the information that I want. Did you see how much I talk? I could ask 80 questions. I could just keep it going. But we need to be careful. So we're fine-tuning what that's going to be. And then there'll be a plan to execute that. Quite a bit of in-person interviewing, especially with larger employers. And then also trying to really hit the heart of, beyond what we know. Real estate's getting more expensive. Things are getting more expensive. Everything's more expensive. Outside of expense, what are the challenges? If it's inside of expense, do you know how you're going to get there? What do you need to help you figure out how to get there? What do you need if you already know how do you get there? So I'm really curious to be able to get all of that information. Probably over the next 6 months, I think we should be able to gather all the information and kind of filter it down to, some very tangible things that we can either provide or more than likely have people that are already doing it well provide. And so it's a concern. As we grow and we have more investment, our downtown is getting more expensive for renters to be there. And most of your businesses that are in downtown, most of them lease. They don't typically own. There's a handful, but most of it's leased. The revaluation that happened in Wake County a year ago changed the value and the taxes for a lot of building owners, and they have to pass that back through. Even if it's not wholly, the rents are going to go up. And so we're in a place where, I say this with all respect, it's not to categorize anyone in particular, but when you go from the same downtown, the same business core you've had fluctuating a little bit for 15 years or so, maybe even before that, and then you have investment, you have things start to happen. There are businesses that will be priced out. Unfortunately, some of them are legacy businesses where they don't have a succession plan and they decide, I'm retiring now because I'm not facing another hill. I can't do it. So that will happen. Or they're hobby businesses and the rent was low enough to do that and be okay with it. But with a higher rent, they don't have the plan that's going to put them there, or they're not interested. I don't want to have 4 employees. I like doing it myself, So that can happen. So we're going through a place where some businesses are filtering out, or they're deciding that this model, pop-up shops, online, whatever, is working way better without the overhead, which, albeit, go do it, because that's, that you're winning. So we're having a little bit of that flux. But I will say the opposite of that comes in small increments. So someone buys this building over here and they work on it for 3 years, and now it's incredible. That's the opposite side of the businesses moving out, and you seeing a little more vacancy. The ones that will move in, they are probably more established. They understand the number that they're looking at handling, and they're willing to take on the challenge of finding the revenue to hit those marks, right? So we're in that flux, which feels uncomfortable for just individuals. Who would know that? All you think is, why'd that business go? Why is this one over here going? Or there's an expansion and I don't have this, I only have this much inventory. There's nothing for you. There's nothing I can do. I can't just put an additional. So there's reasons why the public doesn't know that. They just know what they see. But over time, as we're getting this investment coming in buildings that maybe have sat for a while, or they're changing hands and there's maybe something new, that's really the reward, I guess, or the benefit for the uncomfortable bits that you see off and on through this growth.
Everything that I've heard with growth, and I've interviewed a ton of people that are in this, a similar step that you are. It's like you guys are on the precipice of intense growth and you want to prepare for it. Now I know you've said a lot of good things that it comes with, but I know it can come with some challenges. If there were one challenge, and I'll give you some support here, it'd be unlimited money, unlimited people to work on whatever the challenge is, and a limited time. What is one challenge if you could just snap your fingers and change? What would that challenge?
Yeah, it would be right now in this moment, establishing all of the preservation programs that will benefit for decades. So these programs they're not in the shape of a triangle and that's where they sit. Once you put them in place, they grow. And they grow as people want them to grow and are willing to engage. For that, because it's so fundamental, it's so much harder to replace and repair later. I know that this town is going to develop in the way it needs to. I mean, I could say to you, there's a shopping center I'd like to see in a different situation, and I want to get in there. But, that has one impact, and that's me feeling really good about it. The people loving it because they have a pretty place, and then you see it when you come to town. So it's a better view, but it doesn't really have it doesn't have a long-term impact. And so saying that putting housing preservation, community preservation, or the ability to infill areas with tight homes for people that live there means that the diversity of the community stays, diversity of age, income, race, anything that you would want to put in that bucket. You need it for a healthy community. And if you don't have it, then everyone's the same. They're bored and they want to go over here for cultural events. Just it's an easy look back on, but it's not easy at the beginning to see that that's necessary. So I would put a lot of effort into that because investment's coming. We're gonna, end up having some infrastructure work at some point. I'm sure that's going to give us a, streetscape, which everybody loves a streetscape, but typically it's because you're replacing everything underground and you just get to make it pretty when you finish. So maybe you change the parking and add some width to the street or narrow it or whatever, but it's all because you're doing the underground work. So I know we're going to have that, and it would be fun to fund that too. That would give us a lot of flexibility in downtown, but then it would stop. Once you've done all the things, it would stop. And I don't think that funding community land trusts, giving money to Wake County and DHIC and the other groups around here that already come into this community and take these homes in these neighborhoods and put them in their proper state and preserve it as affordable housing for people that live around here already. I think that they're doing the work and they've been doing it for decades and they're really, really good at it. So funding that type of foundation goes on for decades and decades and decades. And that would be my choice first. And then, you didn't say the part about no one else getting in your way, but if they didn't, I'd probably do that first. And that would be a hard sell for some folks. Be a hard sell. But look, I know we'll never be, an Aspen or anything like that. But let me tell you, that is the black and white version of what happens when you allow unlimited development and you don't look at any of the other foundational pieces to your community. And you end up in a place where you have very few workers, very few people that want to be in business because they don't want to pay people $50 an hour to work there because otherwise they have to drive an hour and a half and they're not willing to do it for your low rate, your low wage. So then all the people that are there don't have the amenities that they came there for. And they're also wealthy people that tend to probably get a little more up in arms over that than the average person would. But it can play out in these smaller communities too. And we always want to keep, as much as you can foresee keeping a healthy balance, do the foundational work. I mean, I've told people in the community, I am doing a lot of invisible work. I'm almost at the end of my invisibility, where I'm able to spend more time on the phone calls that come in, the actual hunting of, I will go out and hunt for companies, but it will be the ones that fill the gap for the tapestry we're looking for here, that makes sense for us. So that takes time and a lot of dedicated effort. And so that has been a spotty part of my work so far, but almost at the end of this foundation building piece where there will be, 70, 80% of that will be what I do. So foundation building, probably in housing, because it does get overlooked and gobbled up.
For sure. And I think you're always looking towards how does this continue and how does this play into the future, which I think is important for somebody that's in your position and for your community. So I have to ask, my next question would be, in 25 years, what are the community members of Zebulon saying about their community?
Yeah. So I have I have enough years to go back to some of the first places that I went. And so I have visited some. And so here's the thing. If I see online, people coming from other places will talk about, like the first community that I worked in, which was, so almost 15 years ago, right? About 15 years ago. How cool it is. They'll talk about some of the amenities. They'll talk about the art vibe, the cultural pieces. And every time I read those little words together, I have flashes that go through my head of work that either I did or was in support of because I lived there as well, and really like what it feels like. But what I can say is when I went back a year ago and spent some time there, I was, as a person who knows the history, pleasantly surprised to see businesses that I personally knew and worked with or put them in touch with, right? The folks that could do what they needed much better than I were still there and had expanded and were growing. I mean, and it was some were just, it was surprising and fabulous. So that was a win. And that means that they had what they needed. They knew how to get what they needed. The goal there was to foster a local economy that created almost a collegiate feel and a peer comfort between our businesses because they were coming out of the recession and it was the future unknown and almost shell-shocked by what had happened. So that worked. And so that was really fun. Programs that we worked on morphed into bigger and better services and programs. Incredible. What I think the coolest thing is in talking to some of the businesses that were still there and doing well is what they see as a difference. Like, remember when, and it was, tough, and the future didn't look very clear. It looked kind of the same old, and look at us now. And I think that folks that live in a space that grow with it tend to take a lot for granted as it goes. But when they stop, when I walk up to the door and someone sees me and is like, oh gosh, has to go way back to down memory lane, she was just like, the change is tremendous. I mean, it's incredible to think about that way. And she's having a moment right there as a business owner. So I can't imagine what it's like for people that just live there or move there because of. That's the thing. And so I think that I would love to see Zebulon be kind of a gem, really a shiny gem for that combination of history, handling growth. They didn't ask for it. It came. And they could try to put walls up. It came. It was going to come here. So handling the growth and feeling good about it on the other side. There's always going to be things people don't like, but the majority of what they see and feel is positive, and it didn't take away from their place. And people that come don't know any of the history and see it as fabulous, this scene, that. That's what I would love to see. That's the goal in every place that I work. Again, because it was all about being able to show my family and myself what I did. Because if you say what I did was paid the bills, we went on vacation and they paid the bills. I mean, people do that. It's very important. But if you have an opportunity to put yourself in a space where there's something that you contributed, that you were a part of, that's what makes the work so rewarding. And that's what keeps really good people wanting to continue to do the work in a space when sometimes people don't want you there. Sometimes people say you are the face of growth. Turn around and leave, So that's my beautiful vision, is that more than not, people would be happy with how it was managed and that they felt respected.
I appreciate that so much. Thinking about what your impact and your legacy is. And you don't even, a lot of people could say, my legacy is we brought in a lot of industry, and that is positive, but you're also thinking about what does that mean to the community? How's the community actually looking at that? And I think it actually brings me the legacy conversation bring it to a nice way for my final question. My final question is, and I'll give you context. We have a ton of young people that are actually tuning in, and sometimes they can, especially when you look at things that are going on in the federal, I don't get into politics in that way, but just sometimes the federal government can feel a little bit intangible. I'm like, it's out of reach. But what are maybe some advice that you can give to young people on how they can make an impact or legacy in their community? Maybe even be more civically engaged or civically aware. So for our Gen Z viewers, do you have any advice for them?
Sure. I think that ways to get involved can be on the periphery. If you're, I don't want to be front and center. I don't want to be part of the conversation because I don't really know who's going to be in there, how knowledgeable they're going to be, what's the environment like, what's the feel. So showing up and standing on the sidelines, sitting in the back and listening. I think one of the things I discovered as a young person in bigger rooms than I probably should have been just in business, because I was fearless in some ways, now I tell myself all the reasons why I think you're doing that. But back then I just did. And it was in a capacity that was off to the side. I mean, I certainly wasn't involved in speaking about issues, but I learned very quickly that those people sitting there really they're not smarter than I am. We're not doing physics problems in here. We're not solving the great equations of the world. So the confidence you get from taking away a mask of maybe, hold on now, it seems like this would be a good idea to fix this problem. How come no one's saying that? Or you do have an idea and you're thinking about it. Someone does say it and someone else says, yes. However, we're a state that our municipalities run through state statutes. It's not the same in every state. And so we aren't allowed to do that because of da 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 da. Oh, knowledge you didn't have. How would you ever know? So I would say get involved. Local is local is best because smaller, more accessible, a lot of different ways to be involved. Local things that happen in your local government affect you more on a day-to-day basis in your life than anything at the federal level. Now, I don't know if that's going to hold up for very much longer because we have a lot of things happening, but typically what's happening in your local, in your town, in your county are affecting your school. They're affecting your roads. They're affecting your transportation, like things that you see and do every day. In that respect, get involved and go to things. All of it's open, like they say, it's your space. If you live there, you're allowed to go to these things. The only things that are closed are by law, by state statute. They have to be closed. You're not allowed to hear those things till later when decisions are made. But I would say get involved. The other thing is choose something that has an area of interest. I mean, just going to a town council meeting or a county commissioner's, 99% of that is going to be boring to a person who doesn't know what they're talking about, has no interest in these projects. But if there's something that if your interest is in really understanding, the health, what the county health offer, why they have this and not that, I'm sure that there are advisory committees that you can go sit in. You don't have to be an advisor, but you can be a public person, listening and watching. You can watch a lot of these online. You don't have to be in the room. You can say out loud, I think I'm smarter than that guy, but I would say thinking of it as the unknown and I don't want to get involved or it's going to be boring or it's just a bunch of old people. All of those might be right. Okay. But at the same time, your knowledge of how civics works is incredibly important, especially if you learn on your own, if you learn it through action and deliberate choices, and it'll play out your whole citizenry in one way or another, understanding that a lot of other types of organizations operate very similar to that same way. That helps too. But more than anything, you'll see people make mistakes. You'll see people who are like me with a weirdo background and I do this job, but I don't do it the same way everybody else does it. You'll see people that fit the mold of exactly what you think. You'll see some dynamic proposal come around that seems like they were never going to go for that. And it gets put in place and it turns out to be something, really innovative for your communities. I think that there's definitely more than people see. You need to cherry pick a little bit. You'll never come away not knowing something you didn't know before, even if maybe it's something you don't care about. But let me tell you, those nuggets of knowledge, they come back later sometimes. So I think we should get more folks involved. I do think that economic development is a good way to introduce different folks. You can have a very one track kind of way of doing it that might fit a place, and you go to that place and you do it that way. It's very job related. It's very industrial or huge advanced manufacturing or something incredible like that. Or you can have I want to build community in place. I want to be more downtown. I want to be more very thoughtful and considerate and wide open to ideas. There's a lot of ways to get involved with economic development, and I'm happy to see that more people coming into it are coming from different backgrounds. I had a meeting a couple weeks ago online that everyone gave their background, and it was all over the board. So I encourage, and anyone can reach out to me. I'm happy. I've talked to people in high school. I've talked to people in internship, in undergrad. I've talked to people in grad school. It's been all over the place for different reasons. They have interest in knowing things. So I'm happy to answer folks' questions.
Shannon, I appreciate you allowing me to interview today. I've learned a lot from you now and then reading your white papers. I love to just hear different ideas on what I honestly think from affordable housing to gentrification. That's why we named this the Gentry. So I think your thoughts on that are very helpful. So thank you for sharing with me and the viewers. And for everyone else, This has been the Gentry Podcast. We had Shannon Johnson, who is the Community and Economic Development Director of Zebulon, North Carolina. Thank you. Have a great day.